stop the music. Anyway, thank you very much. Can I just thank everybody? Can I thank the ambassador, my colleagues from the UN and our NGOs. A special thanks to Harim. You love Africa, you love Ireland, and we love you so much. Yes, to all of the people who have been here this afternoon, it's been a very rich discussion. You know, this is about the 20th city that we have launched the Global Hunger Index. Many of them are in Africa or in Asia, but I think the one here in Seoul is always very special. And the reason why it's what the ambassador said is because Ireland and Korea know famine. And I think what's interesting is our stories of recovery were very different. Ours took generations. And the truth is that the impact of famine may be deep in our nation's history, but every time we see a starving baby on the television, on the news, it reawakens the conscience of the people who remember the struggle. And unfortunately, we're seeing that more and more in the last number of years. There have been some horrific images coming out of Yemen. The New York Times unapologetically printed a horrific picture of a starving baby in Yemen and explained why they had to print that photograph. And the reason was they wanted to shock people. And they wanted to shock the world into action. And partly we're seeing that that is beginning to happen. But last year was not a good year for famine or hunger. South Sudan was mentioned, and that was the first time famine had broken out in a country for 6 years. And rather unfortunately, it didn't stay in the headlines very long. And the truth is, when famine is declared, it should be big news. And unlike genocide, there is no formal trigger or mechanism that requires a formal response. But famine should, at minimum, demand public attention. And yet, a day after famine was declared in South Sudan, the biggest news story on CNN was Donald Trump's latest tweet about a fake news story on Sweden. So, famine in South Sudan and 20 million people that were facing starvation in the Horn of Africa is not fake news. It's very real. Because the truth is, you know, we have the early warning systems. We're much better at this. We have the technology. We can actually reach people even in the middle of war by using cash and cash transfers. But as we've heard today, it is those other big political conflict obstacles that are the ones that we haven't solved. We have to close the funding gaps. We've heard that 70% in Yemen is a record, but the reality is that most UN appeals in most countries are less than 50% funded. And money should never be a reason while people are suffering. But I have to say, in Central African Republic, there is a bright light. Irish Aid Funding, it is the only donor that is funding 5-year programs. 5-year programs. Imagine when you go in, Concern does, and goes into a community and we say, we're not here for 6 months. We're here for the next 5 years. And we're here to plan. And you can do very different programs within a 5-year cycle than you can within a 6-month funding from ECHO or a 9-month funding. Third is prioritize prevention. The former ambassador to the UN, David Donoghue, was at the UN debate on conflict prevention and sustaining peace last year. And he said very clearly, we need to bring the UN back to the reason of its foundation in the first place. That is to prevent war rather than to react to it once it has been waged, and to solve conflict, not merely to manage it. The UN Security Council is very weak. Ireland is in a bid to become part of the Security Council in 2 years. And certainly Concern supports that, because Ireland, as a neutral country that has overcome famine, overcome conflict, and overcome poverty, has something to add. And I'm sure that Korea will fully support Ireland's bid, by the way, and the ambassadors to too shy to ask, but I have no problem asking. But, you know, we have to do that. And the thing is, 3 years ago, we were talking about Yemen is going to become the next Syria. And there has been really an insignificant amount of diplomatic intervention. What there has been a lot is arms trades. Nations that are earning billions from trading arms to Yemen, while at the same time providing humanitarian assistance. And there's a real hypocrisy in that we have to call out and name and shame. And then finally, we need focus. Of the third largest food crisis in the world, 10 are caught up in conflict. Central African Republic, DRC, Nigeria, Somalia, South Sudan, Yemen, Afghanistan, Burundi. That's where our focus needs to be. We have to have a seismic shift of resources and thinking and creative thinking into these areas. And, you know, the one thing we noticed in Concern is the further we go into fragile states, the more we leave behind. The private sector is nervous about engaging in fragile states, but they're going to have to start taking the risks. Because they also, business, does not want to wake up into a world in 2030 where, you know, half the world is too poor for them to even engage. It doesn't make good business sense. The good news was there was a UN resolution 2417, go online and look at it. And for the first time, it links starvation and conflict and holds to account those who are committing war and using hunger or the absence of food as a weapon of war. This is the first time there has been a UN resolution. Now, we don't want it to sit on a shelf, so we have to start advocating for that to become reality. The second thing was, last year was a great story of prevention. In Somalia, Concern and many other organizations with a lot of funding, through cash transfers and everything, prevented famine from happening in Somalia and in other countries that were affected. 20 million people did not starve last year. Prevention is not just a great strategy, it's a great story, and we've got to get those stories out to people who realize, you know, that the problems are not insurmountable. If we say that the problems are not fixable, people will say, well, then what's the point? We have to keep coming back and saying, it is fixable, look what happened. And then the last thing I would say is around youth. In our experience in Ireland, it is the young people who understand the Sustainable Development Goals better than anyone. They get them. They have the app, they can rattle them off. And, you know, they should, because it's their world. When Ban Ki-moon, your national, when he was Secretary General, when he was announcing the Sustainable Development Goals, he specifically called on young people to be the torchbearers. He said, it is the young people that will be carrying this, and it is going to be their future. And he was very insistent that young people were consulted throughout the Sustainable Development Goals. And the reason why is because they have the energy and they have the idealism that surrounds the Sustainable Development Goals. So the three things that we heard is we need young people to educate themselves, to understand what the world is like around them. And we also need them to donate. Lots of money for us, a little bit less for MSF, because they get lots anyway. Joke. But actually, it's not just about money, it's about your time and your resources. You know, it's not, you know, you don't have to write a check to Concern. You can actually donate time. And the third thing is educate, donate, agitate. And use what you can. And everybody else, you know, you can write, you know, you have your phone in your hand and you need to tell young people, use it. You know, start pushing at the political level to bring around the kind of solutions so that in 10 or 15 years, we're not standing here launching a global hunger index. We're saying, isn't it great? And we're looking back and saying, we are now watching hunger declining. And I think it begins in this room and it begins with everybody here. To all of the people that showed up here for this afternoon and stuck through this interesting discussion, to all of our speakers, and in particular to Junmo Lee and his incredible staff, I just want to say thank you very much. And Have a good evening.